You think suffering is supposed to teach you something, that if you endure enough pain, you will emerge wiser, stronger, transformed. That there's a lesson hidden in the darkness, a reason, a meaning. That if you can just figure out why you're suffering, it will somehow become bearable. But Albert Camus grew up in crushing poverty. And the poverty taught him nothing except that poverty is crushing. His mother could not read, could barely speak. She worked as a cleaning woman, scrubbing floors in other people's homes, while her own children went hungry.
His father died in the First World War when Camus was 1 year old, a shell fragment to the brain, dead before Camus could form a single memory of him. And what remained was silence. His mother's silence. The silence of a woman too exhausted, too broken, too deaf to the world to offer anything but her mute animal presence. Camus learned early that the world does not care, that suffering has no purpose, that you can do everything right and still be crushed by circumstances you did not choose, that life is not a moral education. It is simply what happens, and most of what happens is arbitrary, meaningless, absurd. And yet, there was the sun, there was the Mediterranean, the beaches of Algiers, the warmth of the sea, the light, fierce, blinding, undeniable. And in that light, in that heat, in the immediate, physical, overwhelming presence of the world, Camus found something that would shape everything he would later write. Not an answer, not a solution, not a meaning, but a response. He would later write in Nuptials, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer."
This is not optimism. This is not hope. This is not the promise that suffering will be redeemed or that meaning will emerge from chaos. This is something harder and more honest. The recognition that even in the midst of suffering, even in the face of meaninglessness, even when life offers nothing but brutality and silence, there is still the sun. And the sun does not care about your suffering, but it shines anyway, and you can feel it. And for a moment, that is enough. This is the wound that became Camus' philosophy. Not an idea he invented in a library, but a truth he lived in his body, in his childhood, in his poverty, in his illness,
in the knowledge that he might die young and that nothing he did would matter. And still, he chose to feel the sun on his face and call that a form of rebellion. Before we go further, ask yourself this. When was the last time you felt alive? Not happy, not successful, not validated, but alive. In your body, in the world, in the immediate, sensory, undeniable fact of existence. When was the last time you felt the sun or the rain or the wind and thought, this is enough, not because it solved anything, but because it was real?
And if you cannot remember, ask yourself why. What has convinced you that being alive is not enough, that you need meaning, purpose, validation, before you're allowed to feel the warmth of the world? What has made you so disconnected from your own body that you've forgotten what Camus never forgot, that sometimes survival is as simple as standing in the light and refusing to look away? Albert Camus was born in 1913 in Mondovi, Algeria, a small village in French colonial Algeria. His father, Lucien, was a cellar worker in a winery. His mother, Catherine, was a Spanish immigrant, illiterate, partially deaf, who cleaned houses to survive.
They were not just poor. They were invisible. The kind of poor that the world steps over without noticing. When Camus was 1 year old, World War I began. His father was conscripted into the French army, sent to fight in the Battle of the Marne, and within months he was dead. A piece of shrapnel lodged in his brain. He died in a military hospital, far from home, far from his wife, far from the son who would never know him. Catherine was left alone with 2 sons, Albert and his older brother Lucien. She moved them into a tiny apartment in the Belcourt district of Algiers, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. She worked,
She cleaned, she scrubbed floors, and she barely spoke. Not because she was unkind, but because she had nothing left to say. The world had taken everything from her, and she had retreated into a silence so deep that even her own children could not reach her. Camus would later write about her with a tenderness that borders on despair. He described her sitting by the window, staring out at nothing, her hands folded in her lap, her face blank. Not sad, not angry, just absent. And he, as a child, would watch her and feel something he could not yet name, a kind of existential loneliness. The knowledge that even when you are with someone, even when you love them, you are still alone.
Because they are locked inside themselves. And you are locked inside yourself. And no amount of proximity can bridge that distance. This was Camus' first encounter with the absurd, not as a philosophical concept, but as a lived reality. The absurdity of loving someone who cannot love you back because they are too broken. The absurdity of trying to make sense of a world that offers no explanations. The absurdity of being a child in poverty, watching your mother dissolve into silence, and knowing that there is no one coming to save you. But there was also the sun.
Algiers is a city of light. Brutal, relentless, inescapable light. The kind of light that makes shadows sharp and eliminates ambiguity. And Camus, even as a child, even in the midst of poverty and silence and absence, found solace in that light, in the heat, in the beaches, in the Mediterranean Sea that stretched out endlessly, indifferent to human suffering, but also indifferent to human despair. He would go to the beach with other boys from the neighborhood, poor boys, Arab boys, French boys, all of them equal in their poverty, all of them united in their love of the sea.
and in the water, Camus felt something he could not feel anywhere else. Freedom. Not freedom from poverty, not freedom from his circumstances, but freedom in his body. The physical, immediate, undeniable pleasure of swimming, of diving, of feeling the salt on his skin and the sun on his back, and the weightlessness of being held by the sea. This is where Camus' philosophy begins, not in books, not in ideas, but in the body, in the recognition that even when life is unbearable, even when meaning is absent, even when suffering is relentless, there is still the immediate sensory experience of being alive. And that experience does not require justification. It does not need to be redeemed. It simply is, and it is enough. When Camus was 17, he contracted tuberculosis. In 1930, tuberculosis was a death sentence for the poor. There were no antibiotics, no cure. You either recovered on your own or you died. And even if you recovered, your lungs were damaged. Your body was weakened. You were marked for life as someone fragile, someone who might not survive. Camus was told he would never play football again. This devastated him. Football was his great love. He played as a goalkeeper for a local team, and he was good,
Not just good, he was passionate. He threw himself into the game with a ferocity that seemed to come from nowhere. Later, he would say that everything he knew about morality he learned from football. The teamwork, the solidarity, the commitment to something larger than yourself, the discipline, the joy of physical exertion, the beauty of the game. And now it was gone. Taken by a disease he did not choose, by a body that had betrayed him, by a world that did not care whether he lived or died.
He was also told he might not live past 30, that his lungs were too damaged, that any exertion, any stress, any illness could kill him. And so Camus, at 17, was forced to confront his own mortality in a way most teenagers never do. He was forced to ask, if I might die young, what is the point of anything? If there is no future, no promise, no guarantee, why continue? And this is when he found his answer, not in philosophy, not yet, but in the sun, in the sea, in the immediate, physical, undeniable fact of being alive right now. He could not play football, but he could swim. He could walk along the beach.
He could feel the warmth on his skin. And in those moments, the question of meaning dissolved. Because the sun does not require you to justify your existence. It simply shines, and you can stand in it. And that, Camus realized, is a kind of grace. He began to read philosophy, literature, anything he could find. He was a brilliant student. His teacher, Louis Germain, recognized his intelligence and helped him get a scholarship to continue his education. And Camus devoured books, not because they offered answers, but because they helped him articulate the question he had been living since childhood. How do you live in a world that offers no meaning? He read the ancient Greeks. He read Nietzsche. He read Dostoevsky. And slowly, he began to see that his experience was not unique, that the absurdity he felt, the gap between the human need for meaning and the world's indifference, was universal, that everyone, at some point, confronts this, and that most people either lie to themselves about it or they collapse under the weight of it. But Camus refused to do either. He refused to invent false meanings. He refused to believe in God, in fate, in progress, in any story that promised redemption.
But he also refused to despair. He refused to let the meaninglessness of life become an excuse for nihilism. Because he had felt the sun, and the sun was real, and the sea was real, and his body was real, and the pleasure of being alive, however fleeting, however fragile, was real. This is what he would later call revolt. Not revolution, not rebellion in the political sense, but revolt as a stance, a refusal. The refusal to accept that life is meaningless and therefore worthless. The insistence that even in the absence of meaning, life is worth living. Not because it will lead somewhere, but because it is here, now, and you are in it.
He wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This is one of the most misunderstood lines in philosophy. People think Camus is saying that Sisyphus should be happy, that he has found some secret meaning in pushing the boulder up the mountain. But that's not what Camus is saying. He's saying that Sisyphus can be happy, not because the task has meaning, but because the task is his, because he has accepted it, because he is alive and pushing the boulder, and that is enough.
This is not optimism. This is something harder. This is the recognition that happiness does not require meaning, that you can feel joy even in the midst of absurdity, that the sun shines on Sisyphus too. And if he stops, if he stands still for a moment and feels the warmth on his face, that moment is real, and no amount of meaninglessness can take it away. Camus carried this philosophy with him for the rest of his life, through his years as a journalist, through World War II, when he joined the French resistance and risked his life fighting fascism, through his novels, The Stranger, The Plague, The Fall, all of which explore the absurd in different ways,
through his essays, his plays, his speeches, and through his fame when he won the Nobel Prize in Literature at the age of 43 and became one of the most celebrated writers in the world. But he never forgot where the philosophy came from. He never forgot the poverty, the silence of his mother, the tuberculosis, the knowledge that he might die young, the beaches of Algiers, the sun, the sea, the immediate, physical, undeniable pleasure of being alive. In Nuptials, one of his earliest essays, he wrote about the Mediterranean with a kind of religious fervor. He described the way the light falls on the water, the way the heat makes the air shimmer, the way the body feels when it is immersed in the sea, weightless, free, alive. And he wrote, "There is no love of life without despair of life." This is Camus' deepest insight, that you cannot truly love life unless you have also despaired of it, that joy is not possible without the knowledge of meaninglessness, that the sun is only beautiful because you know it will set, that the warmth is only precious because you know you will die. He called this lucidity, the clear-eyed recognition that life is absurd,
That suffering is not redeemed, that death is final, and that despite all of this, or perhaps because of all of this, life is worth living, not because it leads somewhere, but because it is here, now, and you are in it, and you can feel it. This is what Camus means by the invincible summer. Not that suffering will end, not that meaning will emerge, not that you will be saved, but that even in the depth of winter, even in the coldest, darkest, most unbearable moments of your life, there is something in you that remains, a warmth, a light, a refusal to give up on the immediate, physical, sensory experience of being alive. And this is not something you find. It is something you remember, because you felt it once, when you were a child, maybe, when you were in love, when you stood in the sun and felt the warmth on your face and thought for just a moment, this is enough. Camus died on January 4, 1960, in a car crash. He was 46 years old. He had a train ticket in his pocket. He was supposed to take the train back to Paris. But at the last moment, he accepted a ride from his publisher, Michel Gallimard, and the car hit a tree. And Camus died instantly.
The absurd killed its own prophet. The man who wrote about the randomness of life died in the most random way possible. A split-second decision, a moment that seemed insignificant, and it changed everything. But before he died, he lived. He felt the sun. He swam in the sea. He wrote books that changed the way people think about existence. He loved. He suffered. He rebelled. And he never stopped insisting that even in a meaningless world, Life is worth living, not because it will be redeemed, but because it is real. And this is what he offers you. Not a solution, not a promise, not a meaning, but a stance, a way of being in the world, the recognition that you are alive, that you will suffer, that you will die, and that none of this negates the warmth of the sun on your face, the pleasure of the sea, the taste of food, the feeling of being held, the small, immediate, undeniable joys that require no justification. You do not need to earn the right to feel alive. You do not need to find meaning before you're allowed to enjoy the sun. You do not need redemption before you can stand in the light. The sun shines on everyone, the suffering and the joyful, the believer and the atheist,
The rich and the poor, and it does not care. And that indifference is not cruelty, it is grace, because it means the warmth is free, it is given, it is here, and you can feel it. So ask yourself, when was the last time you stood in the sun? When was the last time you felt your body, your breath, your life? When was the last time you let yourself feel alive without needing it to mean something? Camus cannot give you meaning. He refused to lie about that. But he can remind you that you do not need meaning to feel the sun. That the invincible summer is not something you find. It is something you remember. Something you've always had. Something that no amount of winter can take away. In the depth of winter, you learned that within you lies an invincible summer. And that summer is still there, waiting, not because you earned it, but because you are alive. And that is enough. If this reached you, if you've felt the invincible summer in the midst of your own winter, leave a word below. Tell me when you last felt alive.